The man who ran the most powerful drug trafficking organization in history was born in a house with a dirt floor. He never finished primary school. He started working for drug traffickers as a teenager because there was no other economy in the mountains where he grew up. Everything he became, the tunnels, the submarines, the private army, the corrupted generals and presidents, was built by a boy from La Tuna, Sinaloa, who understood one thing earlier than almost anyone else in his world. The only currency that never loses its value is power over the people who are supposed to stop you. This is the story of Joaquin Guzman Loera, the man the world knew as El Chapo. Not a romantic outlaw from a ballad, a supply chain operator, a bribe architect, and a mass casualty event that lasted 3 decades. He built an organization that flooded the United States with more cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana than any criminal enterprise in recorded history. He escaped from 2 of Mexico's most secure prisons. He survived the murder of rivals, the betrayal of partners, and 13 years of the most intensive manhunt in Mexican history. And when he was finally locked in a cell in Brooklyn facing trial, the testimony delivered in that courtroom revealed something the world had already suspected, but had never been forced to confront out loud. His operation had not merely corrupted Mexico's institutions. In critical areas, it had replaced them entirely. Joaquin Guzman was born on April 4, 1957, in La Tuna, a farming settlement in the mountains of Badiraguato, Sinaloa. Badiraguato is not an ordinary Mexican municipality. Badiraguato sits in the foothills of the Sierra Madre Occidental in a region historically known as the Golden Triangle, the overlapping areas of Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, where poppy and marijuana have been cultivated for generations because there is no comparable legal economy. You did not stumble into the drug trade in the Golden Triangle. You were born adjacent to it, and then you either entered it or left. Guzman entered it young, first as an errand runner, and then as a logistics worker for local traffickers in his late teens. By the early 1980s, he had attracted the attention of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the founder of the Guadalajara Cartel, and at the time, the dominant figure in Mexican drug trafficking. Guzman was placed in charge of logistics, coordinating the movement of Colombian cocaine through Mexico into the United States. He was methodical, disciplined, and immediately distinguished himself from his peers by the precision with which he ran supply chains. He also began building tunnels. In an industry where the primary challenge was moving product across a heavily monitored international border, Guzman saw the solution others had not seriously attempted: go under it. The first tunnels were proved by the standards of what would follow. They would become something else entirely. And this is where the story gets truly disturbing. When Felix Gallardo was arrested in 1989, the Guadalajara Cartel's territories were divided among his lieutenants. Guzman secured control of the Sinaloa Corridor, one of the most strategically valuable trafficking routes in Mexico. He co-founded what became the Sinaloa Cartel with Ismael Zambada Garcia, known as El Mayo, and several others. The organization that emerged was built like a franchise rather than a company. Each affiliated partner controlled its own territory and operations, but everyone shared the same smuggling infrastructure, political protection, and enforcement capacity. That design made the cartel nearly impossible to decapitate. You could arrest a dozen Sinaloa leaders, and the organization would absorb the loss and keep running, because no single person controlled everything. It was a business structure deliberately engineered to survive the removal of anyone inside it, including its founder. The tunnels became the signature, not the crude passages of the early years, but precisely engineered corridors with reinforced concrete floors, ventilation systems, electrical lighting, rail tracks, and hydraulic lifts built into the entry points above ground. One such tunnel, discovered near Agua Prieta, Arizona, ran 300 feet from a house in Mexico to a warehouse on the American side. Its entrance concealed beneath a pool table that rose on a panel when a faucet handle was turned. By the time federal authorities found it in 1990, they had no way of calculating how long it had been operating or how much had already passed through it. The tunnels were not a novelty. They were an industrial system. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The tunnels were not the core of Guzman's competitive advantage. They were the visible part. The invisible part was the corruption budget. Testimony at his trial in Brooklyn revealed that the Sinaloa Cartel maintained a monthly bribery operation that touched every level of Mexican government and law enforcement. One witness testified that the budget ran to $1 million per month. A senior commander in the Mexican Federal Police was allegedly paid $10 million. The former director of Mexico's Federal Security Forces, Genaro Garcia Luna, a man responsible for coordinating the country's entire law enforcement response to the drug war, was accused of accepting millions in Sinaloa bribes and was later charged in the United States. One former aide testified he had heard Guzman claim to have paid former Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto $100 million. Peña Nieto denied it. The allegation has never been proven. But the allegation itself, delivered in a federal courtroom by a witness under oath, is its own kind of statement about what the Sinaloa Cartel had become. It was not hiding from the Mexican state. It had purchased significant portions of it. The first arrest came in June of 1993. Mexican authorities caught up to Guzman in Guatemala following a shootout at the Guadalajara airport in which a Roman Catholic cardinal named Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo was accidentally killed in the crossfire between cartel factions. Guzman was extradited to Mexico and sentenced to 20 years at Puente Grande, a maximum security prison. He served 8 years. In January of 2001, he walked out. The most commonly cited account is that he hid inside a laundry cart, pushed by a prison guard who had been paid to push it. Multiple guards and officials were later convicted for facilitating the escape. He was 43 years old, and the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico was waiting for him on the other side of the fence. And what happened next is almost harder to believe than the crime itself. The 13 years he spent free after his release from Puente Grande were the peak of the Sinaloa Cartel's expansion. The organization moved into methamphetamine production on an industrial scale at a moment when American demand for the drug was accelerating. It developed maritime smuggling routes, using semi-submersible vessels to move cocaine from South America that were difficult to detect on radar and nearly impossible to intercept in open water. It extended operations across 5 continents and into more than 50 countries. By the mid-2000s, the DEA estimated Sinaloa controlled the majority of drug trafficking into the United States, operating distribution networks in nearly every American city. The cartel's annual revenue reached an estimated $3 billion per year at its conservative floor. Courts ordered Guzman to forfeit $12.6 billion at sentencing, a figure representing prosecutors' calculation of the total value of drugs he personally trafficked over his career. Stop for a moment and think about that. The cartel wars that defined Mexico during this period were not background noise. They were the cost of market dominance. Sinaloa fought the Tijuana Cartel, the Juarez Cartel, the Beltran-Leyva organization, and the Zetas across a decade of territorial violence that turned Ciudad Juarez, directly across the Rio Grande from El Paso, into one of the most dangerous cities on Earth, with more than 3,000 murders recorded in a single year at the height of the conflict. The violence was not chaotic. It was strategic. Guzman understood that control of a trafficking corridor required control of the violence inside it. The cartels that collapsed before Sinaloa collapsed because their violence became unpredictable. Sinaloa's violence was purposeful. That distinction mattered to every businessman, politician, and local official whose cooperation the cartel required to operate. The second arrest came in February of 2014. Mexican Marines closed in on a condominium in Mazatlan and took Guzman without a firefight. He was placed in Altiplano, the highest security prison in Mexico, and the world assumed that chapter was closed. It was not. Within weeks of his arrival, according to testimony from a former lieutenant, he began planning. The tunnel took over a year to dig. It ran 1 mile from a half-built structure outside the prison perimeter to the shower floor of Guzman's cell, the only blind spot in the surveillance camera network covering the facility. On July 11, 2015, Joaquin Guzman walked out of the highest security prison in Mexico through a hole in his shower floor. Mexico's government woke up the next morning to the most complete humiliation imaginable. The most secure prisoner in the country was gone, and the tunnel beneath his cell had been under construction for over a year, while guards reported hearing rumbling and prison administrators said nothing was wrong. He was free for 6 months. On January 8, 2016, Mexican authorities raided a house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Following intelligence gathered through law enforcement surveillance and Guzman's own vanity. He had been in contact with a Mexican actress and had attempted to broker a film about his own life with actor Sean Penn, a sequence of communications that helped investigators narrow his location. Guzman was taken in a firefight that killed 5 of his associates. He was extradited to the United States in January of 2017. The trial that began in Brooklyn in November of 2018 lasted 3 months. More than 50 prosecution witnesses testified. Former cartel members, former partners, and former employees described in documented detail the mechanics of an operation that moved cocaine by the hundreds of tons. Built a bribery network spanning multiple branches of a sovereign government and sustained itself across 3 decades of law enforcement pressure that would have destroyed any less deliberately constructed organization.
The jury convicted Guzman on all 10 counts on February 12, 2019. On July 17, 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He is held at ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility in Colorado, where inmates spend 23 hours a day in a concrete cell, and contact with the outside world is almost non-existent.
There are no tunnels at ADX Florence. There are no laundry carts. There are no guards waiting for them at the end of a shift with a monthly payment. The sentence named one man. It did not name the system. Every major figure accused of accepting bribes from Sinaloa remained a question mark after the verdict. Genaro Garcia Luna, Mexico's former security chief, was arrested in Dallas in December 2019, charged with accepting millions in cartel payments while commanding the forces nominally dedicated to stopping the cartel. He was convicted in the United States in 2023. He was the highest-ranking Mexican official ever charged with cartel corruption in an American court. He was not the last. The parade of names that surfaced during and after Guzman's trial represented not isolated corruption, but a layered, systematic arrangement in which the organs of the Mexican state had in certain instances been functioning as a secondary management structure for the cartel's operations. Warning of raids, securing safe passage for shipments, and eliminating rivals when the cartel needed the state's capacity applied. And the most terrifying part is this. The Sinaloa Cartel continued operating after Guzman's arrest in 2016. It continued after his conviction in 2019. It continues today. The federated structure Guzman built was designed to survive the removal of any single leader. El Mayo Zambada, his co-founder, operated freely for decades after Guzman's final capture. The cartel adapted. Its fentanyl operations, largely absent during Guzman's years of peak power, have contributed to drug overdose deaths in the United States that now exceed 70,000 per year. The organization Guzman built did not require him to function. It required the conditions that produced him. Those conditions remained fully operational. Joaquin Guzman spent 30 years building an organization so embedded in the infrastructure of a sovereign country that removing him changed almost nothing about the fundamental operation. That is not a story about one extraordinary criminal. That is a story about what happens when an institution built around illegality becomes structurally indistinguishable from the legitimate institutions that were built to stop it. The DEA hunted him, the Mexican Army hunted him, the FBI hunted him. And for 3 decades, the most sophisticated law enforcement apparatus on Earth found him twice, lost him twice, and watched the organization he built continue to operate through every arrest, every conviction, and every press conference announcing that this time it was over. If the highest-ranking law enforcement official in Mexico was on the cartel's payroll while the drug war was being fought, the question that has no comfortable answer is this: who else was? We leave the mountains of Sinaloa and step into something that operated in plain sight at the highest levels of global power. A financier with no clear source of income, a private island, a private jet, and a client list that included some of the most powerful men in the world. He was arrested twice. He died in federal custody. And the full truth has never been told. Jeffrey Epstein is next. Real crimes, told cinematically.